Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I am Ahmed Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources and my team for their cooperation. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, African, Asian channels and also the news agencies, Reuters, AFP, AP. Now the news in detail. Rather news headlines. Iran delivered its promise and now the whole world is running for contain this conflict, which could result in a nuclear war. America at edge. Russia is gaining in Ukraine due to Ukraine dwindling defense. Food shortage in Southern Africa causing famine, putting millions of people's life at risk. G7 countries condemn Iran for this attack. They want to put sanctions on Iran. Talk of its hostages is up in the air for the time being due to this confrontation. In Gaza, the person who stabbed 6 people in Sydney, Australia is a mental patient. Painter artist Faith Ringgold died. Trump hush money case will start tomorrow. Parrot Merlin is in good health. Now the news in detail.
On this Sunday night, how will Israel respond to Iran's unprecedented attack? Hundreds of drones and missiles launched into Israel, leaving the Middle East once again on edge.
The people of the region are confronting a real danger of a devastating, full-scale conflict.
The response in Tehran, celebration and unease as a shadow war emerges from the shadows. Trump on trial, the first former American president to face criminal charges tomorrow in a New York courtroom. And Alberta's signal to Ottawa, butt out from dealing with our cities.
And stop trying to do my job.
The proposed law that would bolster the provincial government's powers.
Global National with RNSO. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight in the Middle East as Israel weighs its response after an unprecedented attack by Iran. Hundreds of drones and missiles exploded over Israel last night, the first direct attack by Iran after years of a shadow war. Israel's Iron Dome intercepted most of the weapons. There was little damage, but a young girl was seriously injured by shrapnel. This attack was not unexpected. It comes in response to Israel's bombing of Iran's consulate in Syria 2 weeks ago. Now, the focus is on what Israel will do next. That decision will be made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet. Israel says it will exact a price from Iran, but world leaders are calling for restraint. Jeff Semple has our top story tonight.
Fiery night sky over Israel. A country accustomed to air sirens and attacks has rarely seen anything like this. Iran, which had never directly attacked Israel before, unleashed an unprecedented swarm of explosives, around 350 drones and missiles, sending Israelis who were sound asleep scrambling for cover.
I think it was quite scary when in the middle of the night we started hearing booming, and we didn't know what it was. I mean, we knew what it was. We don't know what extent it would be.
They knew what it was because for days, Tehran had warned an attack was coming. Retaliation for a suspected Israeli strike 2 weeks ago on Iran's diplomatic compound in Syria. But when Israel's sirens finally fell silent Sunday morning, Israelis emerged to find the missiles had missed their mark.
Israel not only survived, but we came out of this largely unscathed.
Israel says more than 99% of Iran's bombs were intercepted, with help from the US, UK, Jordan, and France. Only a few landed in Israeli territory, causing minor damage to a military base and seriously injuring a young girl.
Iran, from the beginning of the war, wants only one thing: to escalate the region. Until now, she worked through her proxies, but now she revealed trying to escalate the region herself.
But many analysts argued the opposite, noting Iran's attack appeared performative, dramatic and unprecedented, but also limited enough to avoid provoking a larger conflict.
Iran did it in a very calibrated way, sending these slow drones hours and hours flying from Iran to Israel, giving plenty of time for the Israelis and the United States and others to prepare.
Despite the attack's apparent failure, Iran said it had achieved its objectives, with no plans for further strikes, unless Israel hits back. If the Zionist regime takes any action against Iran, our next operation will be much bigger than this, warned the country's military chief. Israel's war cabinet met Sunday afternoon to discuss its next move. We will build a regional coalition and exact the price from Iran in the fashion and timing that is right for us, said War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz.
Do you think there's any chance that the Israeli government essentially lets this go and doesn't respond in a way that risks further escalation?
There has to be a cost to the regime, to the leaders, the officials who prepared and ordered and led this attack.
That expected Israeli response represents a consequential crossroads. Israel's hawkish prime minister has rebuffed past requests from allies to de-escalate and seems likely instead to respond with force. The decades-long shadow war between Israel and Iran is now out in the open, and their next moves could spark all-out war in the Middle East. Carolyn?
Jeff Semple in London, thank you. Sam Mednick is a reporter with the Associated Press in Jerusalem and joins us now with more. Sam, you were awake in the middle of the night when the Iranian airstrike started. Tell us, what was that like?
I was actually standing right here about 2 o'clock in the morning, and right behind me there were red flares that lit up the sky. This was the defense system. Then I heard 2 blasts, one after the other, and it was likely the defense system intercepting either these missiles or drones. The alarm started going off after that in Jerusalem and across the country. People were basically hunkering down, waiting to find out when these drones were going to come. Some took about 30 minutes, but others were taking about 9 hours. So it was a lot of anxiety and a lot of anxiousness last night while people waited for the missiles and drones to come into Israel.
And this morning, what is the sense in Jerusalem where you are in response to those attacks?
For the most part, it's returned to a sense of calm and normalcy. People are going about their daily lives. People are on the streets. Cars are going. Less cars than usual. Some people are a little bit more nervous. They said that they were staying at home. And Israel has kept the state of alert on. Schools are closed for at least another 2 days. And it has told people to be vigilant, although the imminent threat has dissipated right now.
And how about the war in Gaza? Is there any indication what this attack might mean on that front?
This has taken away attention from the war in Gaza, but Israelis are trying to get that attention back on it because they want their hostages back. They want a ceasefire. Hamas said on Sunday, though, that it was rejecting the latest proposal for a ceasefire. Hamas basically says it wants an end to this war in order to get the hostages out. Israel says that this is not something right now they're prepared to do. So it's still wait to be seen what's going to happen, but the families are pressuring the government to bring their hostages home and to get that attention back to this war in Gaza and to the ceasefire.
All right, thank you, Sam. Reporter Sam Mednick in Jerusalem tonight. The United Nations Security Council convened emergency talks today where the Secretary General emphasized the need for maximum restraint.
The Middle East is on the brink. The people of the region are confronting a real danger of a devastating full-scale conflict. Now is the time for maximum restraint.
The White House also confirming U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu immediately following the attack. Biden telling Netanyahu not to strike back and to carefully consider next steps. Our Washington Bureau Chief, Jackson Prosco, covers that part of the story for us tonight.
A late-night phone call between the American president and Israeli prime minister may have convinced Israel not to strike back, with Joe Biden reportedly telling Benjamin Netanyahu the U.S. would not participate in any new offensive against Iran.
But the president's been very clear. We don't seek a war with Iran. We're not looking for escalation here. We will continue to help Israel defend itself.
Biden reportedly urged the Israelis to consider their defense strategy as a win, reminding Netanyahu that Iran only struck an airbase in southern Israel and not civilian targets. A senior Biden administration official told reporters that Israel needs to think through carefully what it does next.
It's just an extraordinary example of military superiority that Israel demonstrated to the whole world last night. And I think Israel also demonstrated that it has friends.
Though the U.S. is steadfast in its support of its close ally, the White House has worked to contain the impulses of both countries.
Mr. President, to Iran in this moment.
Don't. It's not clear whether Biden's warnings may have helped shape Iran's strategy, which involves mostly easy-to-strike drones and appear to come with plenty of advanced warning. It's also not certain whether Biden's pressure on Israel will stave off future retaliation.
This may allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to say, well, my arm was twisted. I really wanted to hit back, but, I had to acknowledge that we do have an important friend here that we should sometimes listen to.
Iran's actions may also reshape opinion toward Israel amid growing condemnation of its actions in Gaza, reinforcing Western support just as it seemed to be waning. The tension may also prove to be an unlikely win for another U.S. ally, Ukraine. The attack on Israel has prompted the House of Representatives to take up a long-delayed aid package to Israel and Ukraine. The vote to authorize billions of dollars in support could come as early as this week. Carolyn?
Our Washington Bureau Chief, Jackson Prosco, thanks. Well, as mentioned, one remarkable aspect of Iran's airstrikes against Israel is the fact that it's the first time that it's happened. But for years, Iran has been funding other groups that have been attacking Israel in a shadow war. Redmond Shannon takes a look at what Iran is trying to achieve and what it might do next.
A different kind of fire lighting up the skies of Tehran early Sunday. State-backed TV showing Iranians cheering the historic launching of rockets and drones toward Israel. We hope this attack continues to the point that Israel is destroyed, says this woman. But elsewhere, many panicked about what a war could mean, lining up at gas stations in a country already struggling with high inflation. Iran's foreign minister says his country has no intention of continuing the attacks, but it will respond if Israel responds. Iran says its attack is revenge for the April 1st bombing of an Iranian consulate in Syria. It killed senior Iranian commanders and is widely blamed on Israel.
It's not about retaliation or revenge. It's about the interest of the Iranian regime to make sure that it projects deterrence capacities so it could continue its aggression and expansion policy across the Middle East.
Iran denies Israel's right to exist, funding Hamas, Hezbollah and other proxies for years, but its government needed to consider the consequences of a direct war with a country backed by the United States, making sure Israel knew the attacks were coming so it and its allies could more easily intercept the attack.
Whereby Iran sends missiles that don't cause any casualties but still show some sort of strength, and Biden wins by intercepting nearly every single one of those missiles.
Analyst Sami Hamdi says Iran's move will prove popular across the Middle East.
What Iran wants to show is that in firing those missiles, it is the only Muslim power standing up realistically for the Palestinians.
Ultimately, Iran is gambling that the US will be able to stop Israel from hitting back. If Israel ignores Washington, the Tehran regime will have some very sobering decisions to make. Carolyn?
Redmond Shannon in London, thank you. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also condemned Iran's attack last night while reaffirming his support for Israel. Mackenzie Gray has more on the Canadian reaction and the Canadians in the region.
I woke up at 3 in the morning because we did get word that 400 missiles were headed towards us.
That's Tal Ben Simon, one of the 35,000 Canadians living in Israel. She says the country's been on high alert for the past number of days, waiting for an Iranian attack.
So last night for me wasn't wasn't the end of the world, even though it almost was.
Last night's address from the Prime Minister at the annual Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner would normally be full of jokes, but it took a serious turn.
These attacks demonstrate yet again the Iranian regime's disregard for peace and stability in the region. We support Israel's right to defend itself and its people from these attacks.
Justin Trudeau quickly leaving to focus on Iran's attack on Israel, meeting with his national security team and with the G7 today. The leaders from the group of advanced economies saying in a statement, "We express our full solidarity and support to Israel and its people and reaffirm our commitment towards its security." The Canadian government has warned against traveling to Israel, which just got tougher, as Air Canada cancelled its Toronto to Tel Aviv flights, blaming government and regulatory restrictions outside of their control. The airline just reinstated the flight after a 6-month hiatus just a few days ago. Israel and many other Middle Eastern countries closed their airspace last night, but have now reopened it after the Iranian attack took place. But that could change once again if Israel decides to retaliate. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
Donald Trump and his historic trial coming up. The alleged hush money payments, the risk of imprisonment, and the ramifications for his presidential campaign. Plus, Alberta looks to block Ottawa from dealing directly with its cities. How Premier Smith is pushing back. Australia's Prime Minister was among those laying flowers near a mall in Sydney where a man fatally stabbed 6 people on Saturday. At least 12 others were injured in the attack, including a 9-month-old baby. Police say the suspect who was also killed was known to them, and the attack is not terrorist-related. History will unfold in New York tomorrow as Donald Trump becomes the first former American president to face a criminal trial. Trump is facing 34 counts of falsifying business records relating to hush money payments to an adult film star, something prosecutors allege was done to influence the 2016 election. Reggie Cicchini is in New York for us tonight with more on what we can expect. Reggie.
Carolyn, for the last few days, Donald Trump tried a series of last-ditch legal maneuvers to try and stall this trial, but all of them failed. So tomorrow, in the courthouse behind me, jury selection will begin. In a case summary from last week, the presiding judge made it clear that this is a trial about election interference. Donald Trump's alleged to have falsified business records to conceal payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels before the 2016 election to buy her silence about an alleged affair. Prospective jurors will have to answer a lengthy questionnaire that includes questions like where do you get your news from and do you have feelings about Donald Trump that could interfere with the ability to be fair and impartial. Now, while this may be the least serious of the criminal proceedings against Trump, it doesn't make it any less damaging, putting his word against those of some of his closest former associates.
I think the biggest issue of credibility, of course, is Donald Trump's. There are records, there are checks, and business records, and what is their defense going to be?
Key witnesses are expected to include Stormy Daniels and Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen, who allegedly facilitated the payments. The trial's expected to last about 6 or 8 weeks, and Trump has to be in court, but there will not be hearings on Wednesdays, which allows Trump to hold campaign events. Now, if Trump is convicted, he faces up to 4 years for each of the 34 charges that he faces, but legal experts say given his age and lack of prior convictions, jail time is unlikely. Carolyn?
Reggie Cicchini in New York for us tonight. Thank you. Ahead, Alberta's premier tells Ottawa to stay out of their yard. How the province is trying to block federal deals with municipal governments. Alberta is butting heads with the federal government yet again, this time over municipal matters. Premier Danielle Smith is accusing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of encroaching on her jurisdiction by working directly with municipalities to solve the housing crisis. Now, as Blake Law reports, a proposed provincial law is trying to make Alberta the gatekeeper.
Alberta is telling Ottawa to stay out of its backyard.
Federal politicians, and the Prime Minister in particular, should do his job and stop trying to do my job.
Premier Danielle Smith rolling out her Provincial Priorities Act, a law that would prevent the federal government from cutting deals directly with Alberta municipalities unless the province approves.
We are taking back more of our jurisdictional control.
It comes after weeks of federal housing announcements in communities across the country, many of those funding agreements made directly with local governments.
We are there to work hand in hand in full respect with those provinces who want to solve the problem, and ask those provinces that don't want to solve the problem to just get out of the way.
New homes are desperately needed in Alberta, which recorded its biggest population spike ever last year. Calgary's mayor worried this new legislation will add another layer of red tape.
Mom and Dad are fighting, and the kids are stuck in the middle, and I'm getting very tired of it.
But the new law wouldn't stop there. It includes other entities under provincial jurisdiction, like education boards, regional health authorities, and post-secondary institutions. Smith concerned the feds may be imposing an ideological agenda at Alberta universities.
How are they politically interfering? By using their federal spending power to fund certain research projects. I mean, that's what we're worried about.
The province says it will consult with affected stakeholders like universities this summer, with the law itself coming into force sometime next year. Blake Law, Global News, Calgary.
The closures, restrictions, and isolation at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic were tough for everyone. And it seems a famous parrot in the Maritimes was affected as well. His name is Merlin, and he's now bound for a new home with hopes that a change of scenery will raise his spirits. Heidi Petracca reports on the final farewell to a museum mascot.
For almost 20 years, Merlin has greeted visitors to Halifax's Maritime Museum of the Atlantic.
He was featured in an exhibit that we had about pets at sea. From that moment on, they decided that this was a perfect mascot for the Maritime Museum.
The hybrid rainbow macaw isn't shy.
I would say he's cheeky. I think that's the way I would best describe him.
But when the pandemic forced the museum to close temporarily, the previously perky parrot started showing signs of depression. Even after reopening, it was clear something was wrong.
He's definitely stressed. He's been plucking at his feathers. So we really decided within last year that maybe there was a better place for Merlin.
That place, Safari Niagara, an accredited zoo in Fort Erie, Ontario.
They're highly social animals.
So Merlin's future home has plenty of feathered friends. Introductions will be gradual and could take months, although there is hope Merlin might eventually make a macaw love connection.
We'll know fairly quickly if we're going to see some sparks fly, but all in due time.
I hope you will be a very good boy, just like you were for us.
As his time in Nova Scotia draws to a close, fans are sending in tributes and flocking to the museum to say farewell.
We'll be sad to see him go, but we're happy for him too.
I mean, he's beautiful and he deserves to have the best life he can.
Since macaws can live up to 85 years, at only 22, Merlin has plenty of life left to live. About to leave his old perch behind for a whole new adventure. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax.
Good luck, Merlin. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is Cottonwood Island Nature Park in Prince George, British Columbia. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers at globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Have a great night.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, Israel considers how to respond to Iran's attack as President Biden and other world leaders scramble to contain the confrontation. Then Amna Nawaz reports from Ukraine as Russia steps up pressure against Ukraine's dwindling defenses. And the drought ravaging Southern Africa is threatening millions with hunger.
Our food situation is difficult. We only eat once a day because we have nothing in the fields, not a single grain. Everything has dried up in the drought.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular, this is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket. Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular, you get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing. Have a nice day.
Certified Financial Planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the News Hour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. The day after Iran used drones and missiles to carry out its first ever direct assault on Israel, diplomacy took center stage today. Leaders from the White House to capitals around the globe are scrambling tonight to try to keep this unfolding and perilous conflict from spiraling out of control. Tonight, our coverage begins with Nick Schifrin.
Above the holiest sites in one of the world's holiest cities, rockets lit up the night sky, and Israeli air defense blocked an unprecedented Iranian attack across all of Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces said it thwarted 99% of more than 300 drones and missiles, the majority launched from Iran, but some also came from Iranian-backed proxies in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. American officials say the U.S. shot down at least 75 of them, almost all in Jordanian airspace. Israel said the only missiles that entered Israeli airspace were ballistic, including one that wounded a 7-year-old girl. Israel reported no deaths and only minor damage to an Air Force base. Iran said they were responding to Israel's killing senior Iranian generals inside Iran's Damascus consulate and called the attack tit for tat.
From our point of view, this operation is over and there is no intention to continue the operation. But if the Zionist regime takes any action against the Islamic Republic, our next operation will be much larger.
By the light of day, Israelis returned to normal, but the region is anything but, and Israel's leadership says the incident is very much not over.
We are still on high alert and assessing the situation. Over the last few hours, we approved operational plans for both offensive and defensive action.
But the U.S. is counseling restraint. President Biden and the leaders of the world's 7 largest industrialized nations warned Iran's attack could lead to, quote, uncontrollable escalation. They vowed to de-escalate. And in a phone call, Biden told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu the U.S. would not take part in an Israeli retaliation. National Security spokesman John Kirby repeated that message this morning.
It's going to be up to the Israelis to decide what the next step is here. I would just say this. President Biden, since the beginning of this conflict, has worked very hard to keep this from becoming a broader regional war, to keep the tensions from escalating.
Senior administration officials said today the G7 group of countries could impose new coordinated sanctions, and other countries could join the U.S. in labeling the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist group. That is the diplomatic focus, John, that the U.S. wants, of course, but the major focus we are waiting for, the major response we're waiting for, is Israel's military response. Nick, let's start by looking back at last night. This really remarkable effect of Israel blunting this attack. The United States did move some U.S. assets into the region. How important were they in this operation? President Biden himself said it was absolutely essential. Over the last 10 days, Israel and the United States have been working coordinated on this response, a senior administration official said, and that included moving fighter squadrons into better positions, and those fighter squadrons shot down more than 70 drones. The U.S. also moved an additional destroyer into the region to join a destroyer already there, and that helped shoot down 4 or 6 of those 100-plus ballistic missiles fired by Iran toward Israel. We know of no previous occasion in U.S.-Israeli history in which the U.S. launched jets during an attack on Israel or fired missiles from boats during an attack on Israel. Strategically, the reason that is so important, John, is that a senior administration official said that if this attack had succeeded, there would have been, quote, uncontrollable escalation and a broader regional conflict. The U.S. assesses that this attack was absolutely designed to kill Israelis and inflict widespread damage, and the fact is it didn't. And if that had happened, the assumption is that Israel and Iran perhaps might be at war already. looking forward, as Israel does ponder what to do next, what are the factors they're weighing, and what's the United States telling them?
Israeli media already reported that there was a quick cabinet meeting last night in which Israeli leaders considered an immediate strike, but that the Biden-Bibi phone call, the Netanyahu-Biden phone call, seems to have tamped down the possibility of that. And Israeli officials today are saying they will strike whenever they deem it proper to strike. There are many military options for Israel, of course, inside Iran itself, whether that's Iranian government, IRGC, the nuclear sites even. But a senior administration official said two important things today. One, Israel's made clear to us they are not looking for a significant escalation with Iran. If that is accurate, that means that they are not looking to strike directly against Iran, at least at the moment. And two, a senior administration official said very bluntly, we would not be part of any response they do. That is longstanding U.S. policy, but still, to say that is really to send the message to Israel, if you're going to do this, or especially if you're going to attack Iran, you would be on your own. And part of what the administration says it's trying to do is, quote, slow things down. And that, as you said at the top, is a focus on diplomacy. The U.S. hopes to isolate Iran through some of those sanctions and perhaps terrorism designations as well. And the flip of that is less isolation, they hope, on Israel. You've seen in the last few hours the European Union diplomats and the UN diplomats who have been very critical of Israel over the war in Gaza support Israel and then condemn Iran in no uncertain ways. And so that is where we are today with the U.S. focus on diplomacy. President Herzog of Israel saying, quote, we are not war seekers, but we'll see how Israel chooses to respond.
Nick Schifrin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Aaron David Miller. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's played a key role in U.S. Middle East policy for every president from Jimmy Carter to George W. Bush. Aaron, as Israel ponders its next move, how significant is it that this attack, as administration officials are saying, this attack was on the high side of what they were expecting, and yet Israel was really able to blunt it, that it caused relatively little damage?
Well, I think it's an extraordinary testament, frankly, to technology. Iron Dome and Arrow 3, which is the latest Arrow iteration, plus a significant amount of help from U.S. aircraft and Israeli aircraft. I mean, 350 crews, ballistic and pilotless drones. It's sort of a milestone, I would think, in modern warfare, given the effectiveness of the Israeli layered defenses. So I think that's quite extraordinary.
And it's been reported that President Biden advised Prime Minister Netanyahu last night to take the win and do nothing. What do you think of that advice?
You know, I think that the president does not want to see an escalation, let alone something that could trip into a real regional war, which would be exchanges over a sustained period of time between Israel and Iran with ballistic missiles, a major flare-up turning into a major war between Israel and Hezbollah, and Hezbollah can cover most of Israel with its high-trajectory weapons. And I suspect Mr. Biden also understands that in a scenario like that, prospects of U.S. involvement are pretty high. So he's given the Israeli Prime Minister the best advice he can, pocket the win. You're now occupying the moral high ground. Tensions between the U.S. and Israel have essentially eased. Nobody's talking about conditioning military assistance or restricting it, let alone ending it to Israel. All of that, I think, is being taken seriously by the Israeli war cabinet.
You know, Iran said last night that this sort of closes the door on the Syrian attack strike that started this, that they were responding to. If Iran isn't going to do more, what about their proxies? What about the Houthis? What about Hezbollah? Are they likely to step up?
I think those attacks will continue, but I do believe, and Iran has a vote, but the Israelis have a vote as well, so it's well and good for the Iranians to say we're done, but they're not the only party involved in this. I suspect that pro-Iranian militias, at least for the short term, won't give the Israelis any pretext or excuse for responding, but I do think, and the war cabinet's divided on this, I think everyone, including the five, including Benny Gantz, believes the response is necessary. The timing of that response, I think, is up in the air, and the scale of that response is up in the air. So I think Israel will capitalize now on the fact that they've got an enormous, the G7 statement was extraordinary in terms of its support for Israel, no concern over Israeli strikes, and a strong statement that also appeared to isolate Iran. So I think the Israelis will ride that for a while, but at some point, I think there will be an accounting, and it probably will be directed at Iranian assets in Iran.
What does all this do to the war in Gaza, and especially the negotiations to try to get the hostages back?
I think it's a serious tragedy on the part of the hostages and their families. Hamas had no real incentive. They believed that pressure on Israeli withdrawal of forces from Gaza was working in their favor. They were delaying, hoping to get a better deal. And frankly, I'm not sure the Netanyahu government felt all that much urgency, given the fact that any deal for free hostages is going to result in an asymmetrical number of Palestinian prisoners freed, which is going to stress Mr. Netanyahu's own coalition. But I think Hamas now will wait to see how much chaos and confrontation and confusion will result from this potential Iranian-Israeli fight. And I suspect there'll be no deal on hostages and probably no operation against Rafah either. But Gaza still will be the focus because of its proximity problem. And the Israelis have hostages, and they're still determined, I think, to eliminate the senior leadership.
Aaron David Miller, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Talks aimed at the release of Israeli hostages in Gaza and a pause in fighting have stalled. Israel says Hamas rejected the latest proposal. Hamas is holding firm in its demand for a permanent ceasefire and for Israel's total withdrawal from Gaza. In Gaza, hundreds of Palestinian families moved north along the coast, despite warnings from the Israeli military that it's still an active war zone. More than 1 million Gaza residents have taken refuge in southern Gaza. And today, the Israeli military said it will call up 2 fresh reserve divisions for future operations in Gaza. Last night's attack has spurred House Republicans to try to quickly pass military aid for Israel. On Fox News, House Speaker Mike Johnson also left the door open to adding long-stalled money for Ukraine to the measure. The Senate approved aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan in February, but opposition from some ultra-conservative Republicans has blocked it in the House. In Sydney, police said the man who stabbed 6 people to death at a crowded shopping mall suffered from mental health issues and appears to have had no particular motive.
5 of the 6 people killed by Joel Cauchi were women. He wounded dozens of others before police shot him dead. And artist and author Faith Ringgold has died. She created richly colored and detailed canvas panels that she called story quilts. They depicted the joys and burdens of black life, especially the lives of black women. As a social activist, she protested the lack of works by black and female artists in the collection of American museums. Faith Ringgold was 93 years old. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, the view from Ukraine, which says it needs more munitions and manpower in its war with Russia. And millions across southern Africa are facing hunger in the midst of extreme drought.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Ukraine has been at war with Russia for more than 2 years now, and there are signs that this year could be pivotal. Ukrainian officials say they need more munitions and support as Russia appears to be gaining ground. NewsHour co-anchor Amna Navaz is on the ground in Kyiv tonight, beginning a week-long reporting trip. Amna, what's the state of the war now?
John, good evening from Kyiv. You know, the dire conditions that Ukrainian officials have been warning of for many months now do now seem to be here, with some even expressing concern that Ukraine is potentially at risk of losing this war this calendar year. Now, two forces are essentially colliding right now. At the same time, Ukraine is facing a critical shortage of ammunition and artillery. At the same time, they have a desperate need for additional air defenses. Russia has also been ramping up its air offensives. It is targeting Ukraine's energy systems with a precision and aggression we have not yet seen in the war, and Russia continues to make advances in the east. Now, we know those Russian forces already occupy much of that eastern Donbass region. They've made advances in the recent months. Back in February, they claimed the key city of Avdiivka. Some say they are now on the cusp of claiming another key city of Charsiv Yar, and of course they're also now relentlessly pummeling the city of Kharkiv in Ukraine's northeast. That is Ukraine's second largest city. It would be a major prize for the Russians and majorly demoralizing for Ukrainians. So John, Ukraine is now facing challenges on these three fronts: an advancing Russian force, their own critical shortages, and of course exhausted troops after more than 2 years of fighting. John?
The shortages of munitions can be solved by getting more aid from other countries, but what's Ukraine doing about the exhausting troops, sort of filling that manpower gap?
And that manpower gap is real. It's been the source of much debate and many controversial proposals. President Zelensky has now lowered the draft age from 27 to 25, potentially meaning that thousands of more young men could be pulled into that fight. But, you know, John, right now in the capital city here, it sometimes feels like those front lines of the war can really be a world away. I mean, life here unfolds at a sort of normalish everyday pace. People go out for walks, they walk their dogs, they go to work, they sit outside at cafes and sip lattes, but that war looms large, and it does occasionally and regularly pierce through that sense of normalcy. There are, of course, burned out Russian military vehicles from early in the war on display in the city center here right behind me. There are memorials to the war dead lining the city walls, and of course there are air sirens that do regularly go off, blaring across the city and forcing everyone to try to find shelter nearby. We experienced one yesterday ourselves. And John, I met one young Kyiv resident who could be entering that draft range soon. His name is Alexei. He works in real estate. His best friend is serving on the front line right now, but I asked him about the war and whether he feels pressure to join up.
I feel guilty. I feel guilty that I'm sleeping in the warm bed. I can take a shower, but from my side, I'm trying to help. Yeah, I know that it's not enough, and even when you die, it's not enough. But it is what it is. And
is any part of you scared that you might get drafted and have to go fight?
My mom, of course, is scared. My girlfriend is scared. So.
And you?
Of course, I'm scared. Of course.
John, of course, with another Russian offensive expected this spring, young men like Alexei could be called to join the fight. So many questions remain here in Ukraine. And John, we'll be putting all of those questions directly to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky when I sit down with him for an exclusive interview tomorrow. We'll have more on that on the NewsHour tomorrow night. John?
We look forward to that tomorrow night and all your reporting in the week ahead. Amna Navaz in Kyiv. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a growing hunger crisis across southern Africa, brought on by an extreme drought that's devastating farmers and the food supply. Ali Rogan has more.
A sweeping drought has devastated southern Africa, forcing Zimbabwe's president to declare a state of national disaster. It is the third country to do so in recent months, joining Malawi and Zambia. The El Nino-induced drought has scorched crops and left millions hungry in the region. Zimbabwe was once an agricultural powerhouse that exported grain to surrounding countries, but over the last 2 decades, it's been heavily dependent on aid agencies for food to survive.
Our food situation is difficult. We only eat once a day because we have nothing in the fields, not a single grain. Everything has dried up in the drought. We also have problems with sourcing water.
But as aid groups face budget cuts and broaden their operation to other conflicts, the crisis in southern Africa is expected to worsen. Tendai Marima is a freelance journalist based in Zimbabwe and joins me now. Tendai, thank you so much for being here. We just mentioned some of the top-line weather conditions that are contributing to low crop yield, but let's talk a little more in depth about the factors that are playing into these conditions being so bad in southern Africa right now.
The situation that is affecting southern Africa has to do with the late rainfalls that came. Normally in the season, the rain would begin in about October or November and right up until April. But what we saw this year was that the rains were delayed and they only came very late in December, and it was just like patches of rain. And then after that, we had some very dry months, and this is when Zambia declared that there had been a national disaster because over 50% of the planted crops had failed. And for sure, a lot of harvests across different countries have been devastated.
Do experts agree that El Nino, the weather pattern that is global, is driving these cycles that we're seeing? And if so, why does it seem to be affecting southern Africa so intensely at this moment?
I think with southern Africa, from what climate scientists tell us, is that it will be 2 years of the El Nino phenomenon and then 1 year possibly of the La Nina phenomenon, which is a situation where there's too much rain. And this is what we've seen happening over the past few years. In 2019, we had cyclones that were affecting Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And from that, a total of 1,000 people died because of those extreme floods. And now what we're seeing is that we've come again to a drought period. This is the El Nino part. And what they're anticipating is that there won't be much rain, and the lean season is likely to last well into 2025. So from about September 2025 is when people can possibly hope that they might be changed, but it's uncertain at this stage.
An incredibly long amount of time. We mentioned that Zimbabwe and the surrounding countries were at one point regional breadbaskets, and now we're heavily dependent on aid to combat the suffering of civilians in situations like this. Can you just tell us about how stark that reversal of fortunes has been over the past couple decades?
It's been incredible to witness because I remember as a child growing up, I think one of the worst droughts that Zimbabwe experienced was in about 1992. I was still quite young then, but I do remember, there being food handouts and things, but the country was able to recover. But when we got into the 2000s with all the other political things that happened in the country, and also because most of the commercial farms, the large commercial farms that used to produce a lot of food for domestic consumption and also for export, these were white-owned farms, and these were taken over during the land reform period, that it left the country without the farming resources and without the financial resources to be able to continue farming effectively. Whereas other countries in the region, they may have things to buffer, or at least plans in place to buffer themselves from the shocks of the drought. But for a country like Zimbabwe, it's in a dire state, and the situation is very severe because at least 2.7 million people are facing hunger.
In terms of some of the contemporary domestic issues that are playing out in Zimbabwe, in March, the government forcibly removed American aid workers from U.S. aid. The president is also under U.S. sanctions right now for corruption and human rights abuses. How do those issues affect aid workers' ability to help civilians right now?
It casts a dark cloud over the level of support that U.S. aid will be able to provide to the country. Security has heightened around food distributions. Another concern is possibly with the delivery of food aid, right? Because things such as cooking oil, because it's a fortified kind of cooking oil that U.S. aid distributes to communities. Things such as that, also the cornmeal that U.S. aid distributes, things have to be shipped. And it takes about 6 weeks for WFP and U.S. aid to be able to get food into the country. So if there are all these sort of tensions, it raises questions, how much longer will it take, given the situation that there is suspicion from the state over the role that U.S. aid is playing in the country? Although they have stated that their intentions are purely humanitarian, and it is the largest donor to Zimbabwe, the government still has its suspicion. So, it raises a lot of questions to say, who will suffer if this suspicion then delays what is meant to be for the people?
Tendai Marima, freelance journalist based in Zimbabwe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. On Monday, the very latest on the situation in the Middle East, and Amna Abbas sits down one-on-one with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Monday on the NewsHour. For now, I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
This is The World Today here on France 24. Good to have you with us for the news today. I'm Stuart Norval. Here's a look at the main headlines. Indications from Israel that it will not respond immediately to the attacks on it at the weekend. That is, Israel and Iran at the UN Security Council accuse each other of being the peace. The first criminal trial of a former president of the US is to get underway. Donald Trump accused of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged sexual encounter with the adult film actress Stormy Daniels. And exactly 1 year after war broke out in Sudan, France today is hosting an international conference. An estimated 1.8 million people have fled Sudan as people endure starvation, mass sexual violence, and large-scale ethnic killings. Israel will respond in the manner and at the time of our choosing. It's the phrase as Israel's war cabinet broke up, signalling then a delayed response to Iran's attack on Israel. Although the cabinet is meeting once again now, its members talking of the opportunity to unite countries against Iran with the aim of boosting Israel's future security. And as the US President Joe Biden warned that the US would not take part in any counter-offensive against Iran, the aim to calm that threat and open warfare erupting in the Middle East. Calls for restraint and echoing around the world, and as well at the UN, as Israel and Iran accused one another of being the main threat to peace. Keris Garland reports.
Setting the stage for a verbal showdown, Sunday's Emergency Security Council meeting saw Israel and Iran exchange blame for instability in the Middle East. Israel called the session following Tehran's retaliatory strikes on Saturday night and called on the council to designate Iran's Revolutionary Guards a terrorist organization.
Iran, the #1 global sponsor of terror, has exposed its true face as the destabilizer of the region and the world. As Iran's mask has fallen, the world's complacency must also fall. The mask comes off and the gloves must come on.
According to the Israeli military, Iran's attack involved more than 300 drones and missiles. It said 99% of them were intercepted, though several ballistic missiles caused minor damage to an airbase and wounded a 7-year-old Bedouin girl. Tehran launched the air assault in response to an airstrike on the Iranian consulate building in the Syrian capital on April 1st. Iran said that attack killed 7 Revolutionary Guards, including 2 generals, and it has widely been blamed on Israel. At the UN, the Iranian ambassador said his country's actions fell in line with its inherent right to self-defense.
This concluded action was necessary and proportionate. It was precise and only targeted military objectives and carried out carefully to minimize the potential for escalation and prevent civilian harm.
Turkish, Jordanian and Iraqi officials said Iran gave notice days before its attack on Israel, but US officials said Tehran did not warn Washington and that the attack was intended to cause significant damage. The US, who along with other countries helped intercept the Iranian missiles and drones, said it would explore additional measures to hold Iran accountable, though officials said President Joe Biden urged restraint from Israel and warned that Washington won't support a counterattack on Tehran.
And the French President Emmanuel Macron has been appearing on French television this morning in the last few hours, saying that France will do all it can to avoid further escalation in the conflict. He also said he'll be speaking by phone today with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, a 7-year-old girl was the only victim of the Iranian drone and missile strike, wounded by shrapnel, her condition said to be serious. She is an Arab Bedouin. They live in the north of the country with no bomb shelters, no sirens, no Iron Dome protection. Critics saying their lack of protection symptomatic of their treatment as second-class citizens in Israel. Sophie Lamott has this report.
Rockets falling from the sky, ripping through this thin metal roof and hitting a young girl in the head, leaving her with a serious injury. Amina Al-Hassoni, 7, was still clinging on to life on Sunday evening. She's the sole serious casualty of the Iranian attack on Israel, and for her family, she could have been spared if the state provided equal protection to its population across the whole territory.
We knew we were going to be attacked. It was on the news. The whole area is unprotected. There are no houses that can offer even a minimum of protection, not just for our family, but the whole region.
She's one of the roughly 300,000 Bedouins, descendant of Muslim Arab shepherds living in the country. About half of them live in villages that are not officially recognized by the government. They can't build permanent homes, they live in small hovels, under constant threat of demolition. They don't get basic services and lack rocket sirens, bomb shelters, and cover from Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system.
We need protection for all these villages. We need to act with the government to prevent any more victims. In the meantime, when shots are fired from the west, it's the Bedouins who are hit. From the east, it's the same. We're the victims, and nobody considers us.
This isn't the first time the Bedouin community suffers the consequences of war. 7 of them were killed by missiles fired from the Gaza Strip during the Hamas attack of October 7th.
Meanwhile, Hamas has rejected the latest Israeli ceasefire proposal over the weekend. Hamas saying it's handed to mediators in Egypt and Qatar its response to the proposals. The negotiations then remaining deadlocked, with Hamas sticking to its demands that any agreement must end the war. Tom Clancy reports.
After rumours reportedly from Israeli forces, Gazans have begun returning to the north of the enclave from the south. But in an official statement, the IDF denied opening the passage. And local witnesses say soldiers have opened fire on people aged between 14 and 50.
The Zionists keep shooting. His son tells me there are martyrs there. There are people who want to cross but don't know if they will or not because of the shooting. My daughters are in the southern part and I want them to cross. We're exhausted. We don't mind the hunger and suffering, but we want our children to go.
Family members separated from loved ones in the south wait eagerly to hear news of their arrival.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, I received a call from my wife, who has been in Han Yunis since the war began in October. She told me on the phone that people were leaving the southern port and heading north, so I came to wait for them here. I hope that they come back safe and sound.
Meanwhile, a recent increase in aid entering the enclave has provided some relief in the south, but the level of assistance remains far from sufficient for the over 2 million people living in the entire Gaza Strip. The Hamas-run health ministry says the Palestinian death toll has risen to almost 33,700.
Now, it is a seismic moment for the US. Donald Trump is due in court later as the first US ex-president ever to be criminally prosecuted, right, of course, as he campaigns to retake the White House. Trump accused of falsifying business records in a scheme to cover up an alleged sexual encounter with the adult film actress Stormy Daniels to shield his 2016 election campaign from adverse publicity. The so-called hush money affair then getting underway, one of only 4 criminal cases hanging over Trump.
On Monday in New York City, I will be forced to sit, fully gagged. I'm not allowed to talk. Can you believe it? They want to take away my constitutional right to talk. I have a crooked judge. This has never happened before, by the way. You do know that, right? Fully gagged before a highly conflicted and corrupt judge who suffers from TDS. Does anyone know what TDS is? Correct. Trump Derangement Syndrome.
Let's hear now from our correspondent who's going to be covering the case for us, Jessica Lemazurier in New York.
A porn star and a presidential candidate. This is Trump's first criminal trial. It'll be historic. No former US president has ever faced criminal prosecution, and it'll be salacious at times. We'll be in for a tawdry and tabloid-esque tale with a porn star testifying. The trial centres on Trump's alleged role in a hush money scheme ahead of the 2016 election. Trump's charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records to prevent news of an alleged extramarital affair from becoming public. Prosecutors are going to try and convince the jury that Trump was seeking to influence the election. Now, falsifying business records is considered a misdemeanor, a low-level offence here in New York, but when it's done to cover up a crime, it becomes a much more serious felony charge. Trump's taking a similar defence strategy to his previous trials. He'll push his persecution narrative and try and paint himself as the victim of a witch hunt. Now, the trial starts with jury selection, no easy task here in New York. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office and Trump's legal team are going to be going through hundreds of potential jurors to select 12 people who are capable of putting aside their feelings about Trump to give him a fair trial. Trump's lawyers have argued that it's impossible to find an impartial jury here in Manhattan, a borough where most residents are Democrats. Jury selection is expected to take up to 2 weeks. A list of questions has been prepared. Questions like, which news outlets do you read? Have you ever attended a Trump rally? Or do you consider yourself part of any right or left-wing radical group like the Proud Boys, QAnon or Antifa? Now, jurors are going to be anonymous to the public for their own safety. This trial is going to last between 6 to 8 weeks. Trump is expected to be in court for the duration of the trial.
Jessica Lemazurier there in New York for us. Now, France is today hosting an international conference on Sudan. The date picked is significant. It is exactly a year after war broke out in the northeastern African country, leading to its humanitarian and political crisis. Just been hearing, in fact, from French sources, and they hope the conference will raise over €1 billion. An estimated 1.8 million people have fled Sudan, with 6.7 internally displaced, as people endure starvation, mass sexual violence, large-scale ethnic killings and executions. Matthew Merry-Carachet has more.
At this hospital run by the World Health Organization, doctors are working to stave off a generational catastrophe. Unable to breastfeed or afford formula, women are coming to the center in increasing numbers, with children on the brink of starvation.
She was sick and malnourished. I came here after she lost a lot of weight due to repeated diarrhea. Doctors are monitoring her to avoid further problems.
After a year of fighting between military factions, the UN has repeatedly warned that Sudan is at risk of experiencing one of the worst humanitarian disasters in decades. The UN says an estimated 3 million Sudanese children are malnourished, and a quarter of Sudan's hospitals are no longer functioning. Some 8.5 million people have been driven from their homes, creating the world's largest displacement crisis. While the majority of people are internally displaced, 1.8 million refugees have been driven into poor neighboring countries that struggle to receive them. In South Sudan, there are about 640,000 refugees, making up 5% of the country's population. This family fled Sudan after armed men stormed their house, beat them, and stole their belongings.
It was very, very difficult. For a long time, we hid under beds without food, water, or help. The bombs came from all sides. Especially where we lived, it was extremely difficult, as we were surrounded by army bases and military-industrial complexes.
Despite the crisis, international aid has only trickled in, with the UN estimating that it has only received 6% of the funding it needs to avoid famine.
Matthew Merrick Carrashay there. Now, and the joke has often been that with Bayer Leverkusen, it really is Neverkusen, but that is no more. They have won the German Bundesliga title for the first time, ending Bayern Munich's 11-year reign as champions. They win by 16 points as they stretch their unbeaten run to 43 games across all competitions this season. To hear from just a few of the fans.
I've been coming here since '93. It's just amazing. I can't believe it. Champions.
Indescribable, insane, unbelievable, awesome. I could cry. I
can still remember 20 years ago when I was a little boy sitting in front of the TV with my brothers, and we lost every final. And now we've won our first final. It's indescribable. You can't describe it. It's like a dream, not even tangible for me yet. Now we've become champions after 45 years in the Bundesliga.
This week then with a few smiling faces. That's the latest on France 24. More for you though in 15 minutes time.
CNA, a warm congratulations on 25 fabulous years.
Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong will step down from office exactly a month from now in what's been a widely anticipated leadership succession. Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, who was earlier appointed the leader of the so-called fourth-generation political team, will take over. A statement from the Prime Minister's office said PMD will formally advise the President to appoint DPM Wong to succeed him. The statement adds that Mr. Wong, who is also Finance Minister, has the unanimous support of MPs from the ruling People's Action Party. Mr. Wong will be sworn in at 8 p.m. on the 15th of May at Istana. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong also took to Facebook to address Singaporeans, adding that leadership transition is a significant moment for any country. Mr. Lee said DPM Wong and the 4G team worked hard to gain the people's trust, especially during the pandemic, and through the Forward Singapore exercise have worked with many Singaporeans to refresh the social compact and develop the national agenda. He reiterated the 4G team's commitment to keeping Singapore working well and moving ahead, which will remain a top priority for the government. PM Lee also called for all Singaporeans to give DPM Wong and his team their full support to work together to create a brighter future for Singapore. And also posting on social media, Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says he is honoured to be asked to undertake this new responsibility. He says he accepts it with humility and a deep sense of duty. He pledges to give it his all in this undertaking. And here's his video message in full.
My fellow Singaporeans, when I was invited to enter politics in 2011, I agreed because I wanted to contribute to the Singapore story. I did not expect then to be asked to serve as the next Prime Minister of Singapore. I accept this responsibility with humility and a deep sense of duty. I pledge to give my all in this undertaking. Every ounce of my energy shall be devoted to the service of our country and our people. Your dreams will inspire my actions. Your concerns will guide my decisions. I ask each of you to join me in this journey. Share your ideas, share your passions and dreams. Work with me and my team. Together, we can build a future that shines brightly for all Singaporeans. I seek your trust, your support, and your continued faith in our shared vision. As one united people, regardless of race, language, or religion, we will build a democratic society based on justice and equality. Let us move forward as one team Singapore and write the next chapter of our Singapore story together.
And now let's take a look at the key dates leading up to today's succession announcement. 2 years ago, on 14th April 2022, Finance Minister Lawrence Wong was named as leader of the Singapore ruling party's fourth-generation team. The move paved the way for him to become the country's next Prime Minister. PM Lee Hsien Loong said in a statement then that the decision was affirmed by cabinet ministers. A media conference was held 2 days later. Former cabinet minister and ex-party chair Koh Boon Ban revealed then that 15 out of 19 party leaders chose Mr. Wong as their preferred leader. Mr. Wong was also there to address questions about his appointment. He said that he's under no illusion about the demands of his role, taking on the biggest responsibility of his life after 25 years of public service. A cabinet reshuffle was announced 2 months later, and this saw Mr. Wong promoted to his current role as Deputy PM, in a move seen as advancing the country's succession process. He also kept his finance portfolio. At a forum in May last year, DPM Wong said the timing of leadership succession has yet to be decided, adding that it was a matter of time.
He added that if this had taken place before the next falls, he'll lead the team into it and seek a mandate from Singaporeans. Later in October, DPM Wong unveiled the findings from the Forward Singapore exercise, an effort that he led to review and refresh the social compact. Over 200,000 Singaporeans were consulted in an 18-month-long exercise, which highlighted several key policy shifts. Mr. Wong stressed that under his leadership, the government will continue to engage widely with all citizens to chart the way forward. A month later, at the People's Action Party conference, DPM Wong said that he's been working hard to get ready to receive the baton from PMD. He also said that together with his team, he's ready for his next assignment. PMD also revealed then that he'll hand over leadership before the party's 70th anniversary in November this year. And CNA is debuting a new bulletin in less than an hour. East Asia Tonight will focus on bringing you news from that region, home to some of the world's biggest economies. And Otelli Edwards joins us with what we can expect. Otelli?
Thanks, Angela. Yes, East Asia Tonight premieres at 6 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, and our first bulletin examines China's role as a potential mediator following Iran's attack on Israel. What strings can Beijing pull given its strong ties with Tehran? Well, the heightened Mid-East tensions coming as German Chancellor Scholz visits China, and we will update you on his visit as he prepares to meet President Xi Jinping and his premier tomorrow. Plus, the war for talent is on. What are the top recruitment trends in China, especially with the fresh generation stepping into the workforce? Don't miss East Asia Tonight with me, Otelli Edwards, less than an hour from now, right here on CNA.
我希望人家会记得周淑敏是一名演员，而不是一个病人。
Rafael was due for a surgery and complications took place, which leads to his death.
On Sunday, Nigeria marks the 10th anniversary of the Chibok kidnapping, calling for the nearly 100 girls still in captivity to be freed. 10 years have passed since the fateful night when darkness descended upon the Nigerian village of Chibok. On Sunday, campaigners and those affected by the event gathered in Lagos to mark the 10th anniversary of the kidnapping, calling for the nearly 100 girls still in captivity to be freed.
It has been difficult in some parts and somehow good. Because in 10 years, I spent 3 years in the captivity. So when I came back, I left work on our way to since the very day we were kidnapped. So I was working with my leg then. After I came back, I underwent surgery 4 times, which is very difficult to me. And the good side is that my fourth surgery, I had it in America. So which I was able to get opportunity to enroll in a program which I went for GMT and got admission into college there.
The Chibok kidnapping was in the first major school abduction in the West African nation. Rebecca, one of the girls, says she's still struggling to get back on track.
Life is not easy for me right now because I always dream of becoming somebody. I still have passion towards education, but I have been denied. I went to treat myself, and upon my return, I got denied from the school government promises. So I am now finding it difficult. I'm not doing anything right now.
Some analysts see school kidnappings as a symptom of Nigeria's worsening security crisis.
The way forward is that we're very serious about security, that we're also very serious about education. Nigeria is the signatory to the Safe Schools Initiative, but we're not implementing it, which is why our schools are sitting targets. And kidnappers can not only go in, they can then negotiate how many of them they're there. So really it's about government prioritizing education and prioritizing the security of Nigerians.
The security lapses that resulted in the Chibok kidnappings 10 years ago remain in place in many schools, according to a recent survey by the United Nations Children's Agency's Nigeria office.
Teresh for his briefing and acknowledge the participation.
Both the UK and the US condemned Iran's attack on Israel during an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council on Sunday.
The United States condemns, in the strongest terms, the unprecedented attack on the State of Israel by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its militant proxies and partners. Iran's intent was to cause significant damage and death in Israel. It launched over 300 munitions, including more than 100 ballistic missiles and land attack cruise missiles at Israel, as well as explosive unmanned aerial vehicles. Iran's reckless actions not only pose a threat to populations in Israel, but also to other UN member states in the region, including Jordan and Iraq.
Barbara Woodward, UK ambassador to the UN, echoed the condemnation of the attack.
No one wants to see further bloodshed. The United Kingdom is also continuing to work urgently alongside the international community to stabilise the situation and prevent further escalation. It is vital that all parties exercise maximum restraint and refrain from any action that may heighten tensions further.
It comes as the US assisted Israel in shooting down dozens of drones and missiles fired by Iran in what was the first time it had launched a direct military assault on Israel.
The Middle East is on the brink. The people of the region are confronting a real danger of a devastating full-scale conflict. Now is the time to defuse and de-escalate. Now is the time for maximum restraint.
Israeli authorities said 99% of the inbound weapons were shut down without causing any significant damage.
Amid heightened tensions after the president's attempt to sign off on the new constitution in Togo, which would scrap presidential elections entirely, parliamentary election campaigns kicked off on Saturday. The elections, which have been postponed twice, are now generating interest among political analysts. Those in power now do not have the guarantee to get the 4 out of 5 votes. That is the quota required in order to change the constitution at the level of the National Assembly. More than 2,000 candidates from political parties and independents are vying for 113 seats as MPs and 179 seats as regional councillors. The vote is scheduled for April 29.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.